All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm a little bit late today starting, so I apologize if you've been here waiting, but yeah, things happen, right? So today, I kind of struggled a little bit with trying to come up with something to stream about, and as I was kind of looking through the different things that I've done, I I decided that it might not be the worst idea ever for me to show a little bit about how I'm changing hinges on my blind corner cabinet assemblies with the UCS. Blind corner cabinets are something that, well, first of all, I think that most of us who build cabinets agree. Um, Blind corner cabinets are typically wanted by people who don't have them or who have never had to fight with them. I personally think these are pretty useless cabinets unless you've spent the money to get the really nice hardware where everything kind of pulls out from it. And so anyway, I digress. The point is that specifically with these cabinets, there are different hinges that need to be used, and in our case, what you're seeing here is a left and a right extended end cabinet, and I'm not going to go into how I've built mine. Everybody builds theirs differently, so far as I can tell, which is probably why um, generally the community seems dissatisfied with what you can get from the assembly wizard, construction wizard, like questions. And it seems like everybody needs to modify these in some way or another to get them to work correctly. And what I have is no different, but I don't want to focus on that for this video because everybody does this so differently. And if you happen to have any questions about how I've done this, or if you want to build your blind cabinets like I build my blind cabinets, send me a message or something. I'm more than happy to help. I just don't know that doing a video on the exact way I've built them will be valuable to most people. So anyhow, this is probably going to be a two-part stream. This one, I think I'm going to focus primarily on how to change the hinges and my process. And the next one, I'm going to probably talk about these kind of hinge annotations that I've got and why I have them and how you can add them if you want to. And I'll go through the process I use to add them. But because of the way that we operate specifically, our installers or our assemblers, depending on what the situation specifically is, have requested that our drawings actually display at each hinge location the specific type of hinge. Now, whether you agree with this or think this is the best way to go about it doesn't really matter. That's not the point. I would do this differently if it was my shop, but it's not. So because I do have to work within the constraints that are, that exist for me, this is a request that was made. This is my solution. And I can't, I'd be very surprised if my organization or the organization I work for is the only place that requests this type of information. So anyway, we're not going to talk about the annotations today. We're going to talk about how I've got my hinges changing. And just to sort of show you, so this BPS really just stands for blind panel soft close. And then FS 170 is for full overlay soft close 170 degrees. So when we do our blind corner cabinets and it's a pair of doors, we want the left door on a left extended end or a left blind corner cabinet to be the blind panel hinge. And then we want the right door in that pair to open up and swing completely out of the way, because these cabinets we feel are already fairly difficult to utilize. So if you've got one where you're requesting a pair of doors, this right door really needs to get out of the way for there to be any real functionality, or for you to be able to get into it without fighting and most likely eventually damaging your hinges and your doors on the right. So what I want to show is the fact that my hinges for these doors are set to our standard full overlay soft close hinges with standard plates. But I think you'll see it. You can see here in our reports, and ignore my massive door pull number if you don't mind. You can see right here that we are actually reporting 170-degree full overlay soft close hinges. Well, the annotation at least is calling it out. And then the blind panel. And these are just called hinge, but when they do report on the reports, they're going to be our blind panel hinge and our 170-degree hinge. And so what today's stream is going to be about is how did I manage to do this while leaving this as a pair of doors. And you'll notice, so again, it's the blind panel on the left, 170 on the right with the left extended end. And over here with the right extended end, we've got the 170s on the left and the blind panels on the right with a pair of doors again. And notice if I switch this from a pair of doors to a single door, which if anybody were to build this cabinet, they'd probably get a talking to. But you can see as I switch the hinge side, it does automatically kind of pick the blind panel hinge for the right, the 170-degree for the left when it's a single door, and again, when you go to pair, it's the blind panel on the right and the 170 on the left, depending on your specific condition. So, I have built a document, and I'm going to provide this. I'm trying to provide kind of a more complete package when I do these videos so that anybody watching can manage to, well, will hopefully just have a better chance of repeating what I'm showing if they'd like to, or just having a reference to kind of go along with it. And I don't really have a great way today of sharing this, but I'm working on it. I am actually working on just creating a better way for me to share this stuff with everybody without having to use the Cabinet Vision forums or LinkedIn or some other something. I'm fairly certain I'm going to build a website where I'll, well, again, I don't want to get sidetracked on that, but I'm trying to create a better way to share what I'm producing with the community. So in the future, you'll be able to just probably go to a link and download this document. But for now, I kind of built this document, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time, but we are going to review this. And this is something that I feel you don't always need to do this, but I think when you're trying to learn how to code and you're just starting to get into this, it's really good to have checklists. It's always good to have checklists in anything that you routinely do, I feel, but I kind of think that specifically when you're starting and you're trying to learn how to write user-created standards to solve your problems, I think that it's very helpful to have a checklist and just a guide to sort of follow to make sure you dot the I's and cross the T's. So this first page is kind of just, I don't know, some high-level stuff, right? What are we doing? The scope of work, right? When we're using an extended end or blind corner cabinets, we want the hinges and plates to change from the standard selections to specific hinges for the application. By the way, I will be using the terms extended end and blind corner interchangeably. Cabinet Vision calls these extended end cabinets. Most of the people I encounter in real life call them blind corner cabinets. So I will be using the terms interchangeably, and I'm sorry if that's confusing. It's just one of those things. So anyhow, this next section is almost kind of like a disclaimer. As we work through this on my system, we're going to be referencing my system's material ID numbers. And my system material ID numbers are not going to be the same as your system material ID numbers. And so what is important to consider as you watch this video, and if you're attempting to do something similar, is that you need to go and get your own material IDs from your material manager within Cabinet Vision. Just because my full overlay soft close hinge material ID is 138 doesn't mean that yours will be that. And You're not going to call it full overlay soft close hinge, I'm sure. You'll probably call it something different based on the needs of your organization. For my workplace, they wanted the report to say full overlay soft close hinge, so that's what it says. But yours might be the actual product number, or whatever it is that you use to refer to your products internally. And the last little part on this sort of first page is just a little bit of just kind of a suggestion. There's a commonly there's a practice known as rubber ducking or rubber duck debugging, and this has been mentioned on the Cabinet Vision forums by many users over the years. But in a nutshell, I find that when I'm trying to work through something like this, it helps me personally, whether I'm debugging an issue or I'm just trying to start with an outline, to actually kind of recite either to myself or to a little rubber duck on your desk, as is referenced in rubberduckdebugging.com or whatever. It just helps to kind of like talk through something. And if any of you watching this journal, for example, you will understand right away. So often the same idea really applies with journaling. You kind of just want to get things out of your head, and it allows you to process like whatever it is you're thinking about in just a slightly different way, to kind of just get it out rather than keeping it all inside of your head. And whatever the psychology is behind that, I have no idea, but I can tell you that it does work, and I really do recommend it. So even just the next time you run into a small little confusing thing, try it. Try talking through it. There's a good chance that you will, halfway through your explanation to your inanimate object or friend or whatever, realize, oh, I don't actually need your help with this. Thank you for listening to me. I just talked myself through to a place where I understand what I was doing wrong to begin with. And that's more on like the debugging end than it is the front end of starting. But I think the ideas are generally fairly closely related to one another. And for me, I just think that it helps to kind of describe what I'm trying to do before I start, so that I can gather what I need. And that's what this second page is, right? What will we need to know while writing our UCS? So I've listed, the different internal part names that I know I'm going to need to reference. This UCS is going to be working with hinges and hinge plates, because not only do I want the hinges changing in the software, but it's very important that the hinge and the appropriate hinge plate are reported, so that when we order, or when we do material requisitions for our installers, they get the right parts. If you've ever put the wrong hinge into a door and then had to take that hinge out and put a new one, especially if you've got the press-in hinges, you will understand how important this is. And so I've got the internal part names kind of identified that I know I'm going to need to use. And then I thought to myself, what types of system parameters will I need to reference for the different conditions that are going to exist? And, specifically, I am going to need the REND system parameter for the right end type condition of a cabinet, the LEND for the left end. HNG is a parameter that references the hinging of a door, so that'll help us know whether or not we're looking at a hinge that is on a left hinging door or a right hinging door. And then the last two that I know we're going to need are kind of related. It's mat ID and _M:\mat ID. So they're very similar, but one of these is used to assign a material to an object, and the other one is used to ask the object what material it's made from. If you don't use these in the right application, if you try to assign a material by using _M:\mat ID, it's going to fail. So they are different enough that it's important to know, kind of like how they work. But yes, so, and then the last thing that I really thought that would be very important would be, again, since I know I'm going to need my material IDs, what are the different material IDs of the different hinges that I expect to encounter? So at our organization, we use full and half overlay hinges. Our half overlay hinges are primarily for closets. We don't really like mixing full and half on a single job, so we try not to hinge off of a partition where it'll be sharing the partition with like another half overlay door. But it does happen, right? So we have full and half overlay, and then to be totally honest, sometimes like $100 or $200 will be the difference between some of the homeowners' abilities to buy from us or not. And so that's why we actually do offer soft close and self close, or so I'm told, right? I think that that's questionable, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. So, and then last but not least, again, just because of the types of conditions, we need different door swing hinges. And so we've got self-closing and soft closing 170-degree hinges, and self-closing and soft closing blind corner hinges. So that's quite a different combination of possibilities. We've got like whether the cabinet end is left or right, then we've got whether the door is left or right, and then depending on whether it's an extended left or extended right, you're going to want to replace your hinge on your left or right door with a 170 or a blind corner. So there are quite a few different possibilities, but it's not really all that hard to handle. Now, I'm actually working right now on, just really for fun, not because I think that I need to optimize this UCS or anything, but just because I like it, I guess. I'm working on rewriting this UCS, and if you're familiar with the hide parameter of cabinet vision, where you can hide in plan, elevation, or 3D, and the values of those are like, to hide in plan it's 1, to hide in elevation it's 2, and to hide in 3D it's 4. And you set your hide parameter to any combination of those numbers, and you'll get your objects hiding in the either plan or elevation, or plan and elevation, or all three, or whatever, right? I'm trying to rewrite this in that sort of style because I think it, again, really just because I'm interested, and I think that it's possible, and it's something that I've always really wanted to learn more about. But this video will be a little simpler than that, so I don't know, kind of going on a tangent. So now that I've kind of gathered all of this basic information, I find it's helpful to consider the various conditions that will impact what I'm doing. So these are, as I've already kind of talked about it, right? What are the possible configurations or conditions to consider when I'm writing this UCS? And I know that I'm going to have left and right extended ends, and then I'm going to have conditions where there's a pair of doors or just a left door only on my left extended ends. And victim of copy paste here a little bit. My right extended ends, I'll have a pair of doors, which will be left and right doors, and then I will have a right door only condition as well. So now that I've outlined this, the last thing I recommend doing when learning or working on UCS with different branching possibilities is to list each condition to kind of create like a checklist. So these would be the different conditions that I know I need to address. And I will kind of keep this off on my other screen while I'm working through to make sure I'm kind of checking the box off of each of these things, and hopefully at the end I will not have any debugging that I need to do, and I will have gotten every last thing of what I'm trying to do taken care of on the first go round. So I'll provide this document. I'm going to be changing it as I kind of wrote up here if you happened to read it. I'll be taking away all of these material ID numbers when I share it and just replacing it with like some underscores just to kind of be a placeholder to let you know you need to put your own material IDs in there. And then I'll be, just calling this like hinge 1, hinge 2, hinge 3, blah, blah, blah. So it'll be a little bit different if you're going to download this on your own. But for the video, I've already gone through and populated all of this information beforehand so that I can easily reference it while we're working, and you don't have to wait on me to to do any of that. So I'm just kind of setting this up on my other screen real quick so I can see it and monitor chat and everything, and then we will jump right in. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to turn the UCS off that I've already built that does this, and we're going to kind of step through what will need to happen for this. So I've got a UCS set up, and as I've tried to suggest time and time again, I do have a filter kind of in place. But I don't want to have this as a cabinet level. I want to set this up on my job so that my job will just allow me to test or not. So I've got this sort of test statement, and before I go further, because I am guilty of really doing this quite often, I'm going to make sure I go and add this attribute to my job. And I'm going to make sure I've got this UCS turned on. And I'm actually just going to delete everything as well, so that we're just starting from scratch. So to add that parameter or attribute that is going to let you test, this would be how you would add it. And the description doesn't matter. This can be whatever you want. I just normally, for simplicity, I just paste the actual name of the parameter in here and then just put a colon after it. Setting it as an attribute will make it appear on the left-hand side of your room. Because it's a job properties, it'll appear up here under the job properties section rather than the room parameters, or job parameters rather than room parameters. Excuse me. And then I think I might have said this already, but Boolean is just true false in case you're unaware, right? So 1 is true and 0 is false. So I'm basically saying the value of ACC test UCS is true or 1. When I do this, you'll see it show up over here, and it's true. So that's going to allow my UCS to pass through, or really just make it past that filter, that exit filter, without affecting, if you happen to be on a network, without affecting anybody else and what they're doing, or really just without like breaking your other cabinets in your job. So being a little bit lazy with my wall numbers, so I'm trying to just even them up a little bit real quick. All right, so where do we start, right? I've got my list of all of my different Hinge IDs, and essentially, again, what we're trying to say is when we've got a certain condition, we want the hinges to change. So because Cabinet Vision's test environment is really just like whatever job you're in, you want to create the conditions, or I think it's valuable to create the conditions you're trying to test really while or before you start writing your code. And so depending on how you've got your blind panel cabinet set up, or really whatever cabinet you're trying to do this on, right? It doesn't have to be blind or extended end cabinets. It can be whatever you want. But I find that it's helpful to set the situation up. So I've put my cabinets in here, I've extended the ends, and they're set up correctly, but the hinges are wrong. And you'll notice I actually have, like, I have a different UCS in here that is intended to help our team pick the right hinges, basically. There's a great big stop sign. Well, it's kind of small, I guess, but there's a stop sign over the hinge because this hinge is wrong. But to convince, or not to convince, to kind of simplify this, I'm going to try to find my hinge warning UCS wherever it is in this mess and shut it off. Bear with me. I should have done this before I started. All right, so I've got my hinge type warnings turned off, and that'll make this a little bit easier, a little bit less confusing, I think, for everyone. So right now, as you can see, my hinges are calling out their full overlay soft close because that's what the cabinet is set to. So I know that I want these blind panel hinges on the left and these to be 170-degree full overlay on the right. So the UCS that I am going to be writing is going to be for each hinge and hinge plate part. I showed earlier in my document that the part names, the internal part names I'm going to need are HNG for hinge and S_HNG_PLT for hinge plate. So, as is the case with every UCS, your for each line needs to specify or call out the different parts that this UCS is going to work on. And then immediately after I have these parts called out, I have my exit so that, basically it's best practice for performance, and it's also to, as I said earlier, prevent unintended things from happening. So I want to talk for just a minute about what I've done to prepare, and I should maybe go do, I'm just going to show you the hinge model that I've created for my blind panel hinge, because that's going to kind of help explain what I'm doing with my hinge plates later. So if you're not familiar, you can actually access your material manager while you're still in a job, which is frankly a pretty nice thing that they've done. So thank you, Cabinet Vision people. I know that I'm kind of, well, let's not get into that. Thank you, Cabinet Vision. This is a really great improvement. So if we look at my blind corner hinge, I found that it was easier for me when I was building this to actually just have my hinge plate included right here with my hinge. So this is not the way that hinges typically work in Cabinet Vision at this point. They're separate objects. You've got a hinge and a hinge plate. Because they can be used, you can have one hinge plate and use many different hinges on it depending on the manufacturer. I think that was a wise decision to separate the two. But for what I was trying to do here, I thought it would be easiest for me to just include the hinge plate and the holes, really, that are going to be applied to the panel from the hinge plate right here in the model, just to make it easier for me to build it all together. So my UCS is going to be, in this particular condition, actually targeting the hinge plate that should be going with the blind panel hinge and setting the quantity to 0, if I'm not mistaken, and then I'll be dimming a hidden hinge plate for my report as well. So this one is just for visual representation. It doesn't actually report, but I think that this will help as we go through the way I've written this, to kind of make things make a little more sense. So my blind overlay, my blind corner 95-degree hinge and my blind corner soft close 95-degree overlay hinges both have that same sort of thing going on with them. They've got the hinge plate included with the model. So back to the user created standards, right? What we need to do is we need to first, there's a lot of different ways that you can do this, but I think that for this one, the way I thought about it was basically saying, let's take care of all of the extended left ends first, and then we'll take care of all of the extended right end conditions second. Or maybe I did right then left first. I don't really recall. But the first thing I want to do is, because I have identified two different parts, hinge and hinge plate, but I'm only trying to change the hinge, I need to make sure that I work basically only on the hinges. So if this name equals hng, then, and the use of this, if you're unfamiliar with it, it's basically just a way to say don't look up the object tree. Only look within this limited scope. It's generally a good practice. It will help you be more specific about what you're trying to write your UCS for, and prevent just any weird things from happening by accidentally climbing the object tree and finding a different hinge somewhere. Or different whatever, right? So I've isolated that I'm only going to be working on the hinges, and at this point I need to check for what my cabinet end condition is. So I'm going to start with my right extended ends, and if you recall from earlier, the system parameter for the right end is rend, and if it has a value of 3, then it is an extended right end cabinet. So again, it's very simple. It's a straightforward if-then condition. If the cabinet's right end is 3, then we know it's a right extended end. So at this point, we know we're working on a hinge, and we know we're working on a cabinet that's got a right extended end. We need to now check to see, is it hinging left or is it hinging right? Now, a lot of times when you're writing stuff for hinges or doors or anything in general, it's actually important to check to see, are you working on a pair of doors or are you working on a single door? In this particular case, it doesn't actually matter, because the hinge doesn't care whether it's a pair of doors or a single door. All it really cares about is if the door's HNG parameter is 1 or 2. And I will actually jump out of this real quick to show a little more of what I'm meaning. And yes, there's an error, I know. I didn't really finish my UCS at all there, but I'm trying to just show not that one. So the hinge, right? The hinge doesn't actually care if it's a pair of doors or not. All the hinge really cares about is, I think it's for door open actually, what is the HNG value of the door open? So on this particular one, it's 1. And this particular one over here, it's 2. So the door open, which is, you know, up the object tree a little bit from the hinge, is actually going to tell the hinge whether it's a left or right hinge, so we don't need to know whether it's a pair door or a single door. So anyway, at this point, we don't need to check the S type of the doors to see if it's a pair or not. All we really care about is what is the hinging. So if HNG is equal to 2. So this could actually be written a couple of different ways. We could specify the exact path. We could say, you know, if door open is door open.hinge is equal to 2, and it would kind of like climb up the object tree to the door opening. We could put if colon hng is equal to 2 then, and it would climb its way up the object tree as well. But we don't even need to do that, honestly. Writing it just if hng is equal to 2 then will work. The only difference between putting a colon before hng or not is whether or not the object will check itself. So without having colon hng, the hinge is actually going to check itself to see if it has its own value of hng before looking to its parent to see if its parent has it, before looking to its grandparent to see if its grandparent has it, so on and so forth. So if you don't want an object to check itself, but you do want it to climb all the way up the object tree, put a colon. If you don't care if it checks itself or you want it to check itself first, don't, and it should fairly reliably check itself first before climbing up the object tree. So we know it's a right door. And now we need to determine like what hinge is being used. And so at this point, I need to determine, is it a full overlay hinge or not? Although, to be honest, with a right extended end cabinet and a right door, I don't care if it's full overlay or not because I have one style of blind panel hinge as it relates to overlays. I've got the I've got the soft close and the self close, but they are both the same type of overlay. So I don't need to worry about the overlay on them. And again, because it's a right door on a right extended end cabinet, I know I want this to be swapped to a blind corner hinge, and I don't care about the overlay. So all I really need to do is check, is it one of my soft close hinges, or is it one of my self close hinges? So referencing this, I'm going to check to see if it's one of my soft close hinges, and I'm going to switch it to be my blind corner soft close hinge. So my soft close hinge material ID numbers, these two right here, because I know I don't have it set to 170-degree hinges, and I know I don't have it set to blind corner hinges, I've got it set to be full overlay soft close for my cabinet, or half overlay soft close for my cabinet. So if the material ID of the hinge is either 138 or 141, I know that my hinge material schedule has been set to one of my soft close schedules, and so I want to change the hinge's material ID to be my soft close blind corner hinges material ID. So if it's 138 or 141, and this is where we're going to use the _m:\mat ID to query the materials, really the parts material ID, rather than assigning the material ID to it. So this is basically saying, right, if this material ID is equal to 138, or, which is that vertical pipe thing, it can also just be written as or, this material ID equals 141, then it's one of my soft close hinge schedules. And I know I'm going to change my material ID to my blind corner soft close hinge material ID, which is 2164. Because I know that I only have a self and a soft closing blind corner hinge, I don't need to query for any other material IDs on this hinge, because if it's not a soft close hinge schedule, then it's going to be just a regular self close hinge schedule. So I will use else here and define it as my regular self-closing blind panel hinge, which right here, blind corner self-close hinge material ID of 116. And if. And I don't have any other conditions for a right door, or any other conditions I really care about checking for a right door on a right extended end assembly. So I will end that if as well. So we do want to address the left door, though, of the right extended end cabinet. So we're not going to end the if where we're checking to see if it's a right end yet. We're just going to start another if hinge equals 1. And if you're not familiar with where to get this information about hinges, basically it's in the system parameters under the help file. Just search for HNG. And then matching case is good, and matching the whole word is going to prevent hits from like this from showing up. But hinge still appears fairly often, so you're going to have to click next a few different times to get to it. But HNG specifies the hinging on a door/drawer, and these are the different values that it can be typically, right? 0 would mean there's no hinging, 1 would be left, 2 would be right, 3 would be top, and 4 would be bottom. Here's some information about like drawer opens, you know, having like a tilt down or whatever, but that's not really important to us right now. We're really only focused on 1 is the left hinge and 2 is the right hinge. So anyway, right, 2, right door, 1, left door. So if we're working with a left door of a right extended end cabinet, this is where we want to start switching our hinge to be one of our various different 170-degree hinges. And I have 4 different possible 170-degree hinges to consider. I've got my full overlay soft close, my full overlay self close, my half overlay soft close, my half overlay self close. Those 4 different possibilities could be used for this hinge depending on what the user of the software is doing at this time. So I need to basically create 4 different checks to see what exactly I'm using. Now, I will say that unfortunately this is kind of a clunky way to do it. There are enough issues with the later versions of the software right now that I can't justify switching our organization over to them. A much better solution here would really be to have schedule parameters that you can reference, but don't quote me on this, check it for yourself before deciding it's true, but I'm fairly confident that material schedule parameters in version 12 were not working the way that they should. Like, I don't think I can even query material schedule parameters in a UCS in version 12 because it's just not functioning correctly. If you could, that would be a much better way to go about doing this, because you could then just query material schedule values rather than having to go for each and every hinge, and that would reduce the amount of code you would need, I think. But that's neither here nor there. So at this point, I just need to start checking the different things. So this is, again, why I have listed the different material IDs that I have got here. So I'm going to focus on these 2 and these 2. And depending on which one of these numbers matches my current hinge, I will need to switch to one of these 2 hinges or one of these 2 hinges. Again, because if I've got my schedule to a soft close hinge schedule, then I want to switch my 170-degree hinge to also be a soft closing version of it. So the different conditions I need to check for are 138 is my full overlay soft close hinge. So if it's my full overlay soft close hinge, again referencing, if I'm a full overlay soft close hinge, then I want to switch to my full overlay soft close 170-degree hinge, which is a material ID of 115. So at this point I could do, end if, and then I could do if this dot, underscore m mat ID equals the next one. And we would end up with this nested cascading if then else condition, and there's nothing wrong with that. But to just keep this kind of simple and easy to read, I'm going to do if, then, and if over and over. So 139 is my full overlay self-close hinge, and I know when I have a full overlay self-close hinge, I want to switch to a full overlay self-close 170 degree hinge. Sorry if this seems obvious, I'm just trying to be thorough. And that material ID, again, is 113. So on and so forth. So the next one I'm going to check for is 141, which will be my half overlay soft close. $18.51 is my 170 degrees half overlay soft close hinge. And the last one I'm going to check for is 140, which is my half overlay self close hinge. And my material ID for my 170 degree half overlay self close hinge is 142. Now it would be best practice, I would say, would be to comment the hinge that you're switching it to as well. I didn't, so I'll go through real quick here and do it. All right, so those are the, remember, if you'll recall, we said there are 4 different possibilities for this hinge. We've covered all 4 of the different possibilities. So at this point, we're going to go and if. So at this point, if you are kind of utilizing this conditions to address thing, what you'll probably notice is how similar this right here actually looks to this so far. Right? If cap.rend equals 3, then it's the extended right. If hinge equals 2, then it's the right door. Soft close, self close. And then if hinge equals 1 left door, we've got full overlay, soft close, self close, half overlay, soft close, self close. So as far as this list goes, this first section is pretty well done. So however you want to mark it as complete, you can highlight it. If you want to print this to PDF and make checkboxes for it or something, that works just fine. So this would be, again, just my way of kind of like checking off the boxes as I work my way through my UCS to make sure that I dot all the I's and cross all the T's. At this point, if you are familiar enough with UCS that you don't need practice writing them, I would copy this entire block, paste it again down here, and then go line by line and change them. If you don't happen to be super familiar with writing UCS, that's probably going to get you into trouble. I think you'll probably run into situations where you miss changing something, or you transpose some numbers, or you make a typo or whatever. So You also don't really get any practice by doing that necessarily. So if you're trying to learn, I would write out the entire next section of this as well. If you're comfortable and familiar, copy pasting will save you time. So we've finished all of our conditions for our extended right end. So we need to have an end if that closes that sort of opening if. At this point, we now need to check to see if the cabinet's left end is 3. Keep the formatting as identical as I can. So at this point, this is where I say that if you wanted to copy and paste it, you could, and you'd probably do fairly well, but I think it's better to write it again. So in this particular case, we had a extended right end with a right door first. And if you'll remember, as you think about the layout of an extended right end cabinet or a right blind corner cabinet, you want the right door of your opening to be your blind panel hinge. On a left extended end cabinet, this would be your left door that you want it to be, the blind panel hinge, not your right door. So instead of checking for if hinge equals 2, like we did up here on line 13 for the right door, we're going to check to see if hinge equals 1 for the left door of our left extended end assembly. And at this point, we're really, again, we're just kind of repeating this. At this point, you can copy paste, and it doesn't matter because nothing about the code at this point is any different. We're still checking to see if it's a soft close hinge. If it is a soft close hinge, we're switching the material ID from, you know, the standard hinge selection to our soft close blind panel hinge, which is 2164, actually. Didn't comment that the way I should have. So we can close that end if now because, again, the left door of the left extended end is identical in terms of how we want our hinges to work as the right door of our right extended end cabinet. Just as a little tip, a lot of times when I am working with code that repeats, and as another sort of aside, if you have repeating code, there's probably a more elegant way to do it. It's generally considered bad practice to repeat the same sort of code over and over, but we don't always have the tools or the knowledge to prevent that from happening. And so if you don't happen to know how to write this in such a way that you don't have repeating codes, I think it's very helpful to try to use comments to break your code up into sections to make it a little bit easier to maintain. And a lot of the ways that I like to do that is by just using like a semicolon and then a bunch of, you know, equal signs or dashes or something. And you can get as elaborate with this as you want. You know, you can call it out like, you know, left or right. And then a lot of times what I will actually do is actually put like start. And then end. Like I said, you can get as elaborate with this as you want. Whatever works for you. I do think that it's helpful to sort of separate your sections like this. Just for maintenance later. or for debugging if you don't know how, if you're not really confident in what you're writing and you know you're going to need to come back and check individual sections later, this can be a helpful way to come back and read your code a little bit easier at a later date, in tandem with flagging things and stuff like that. So at this point, we're going to do again a very similar condition to what we had up here, but instead of checking for if hinge equals 1, we're going to go hinge equals 2. And just as before, we don't need to rewrite all of this. If you want to, because you want the practice, that's okay. But the more you type when you're coding, the greater the possibility of like typoing and getting like an off by 1 error or something that is extraordinarily difficult to find. So if you don't need to retype something, I recommend not. So we're going to close this and this if hinge equals 2. And then we are also going to close this if cabinet.lend equals 3 for an extended left end. So at this point, we've addressed the hinges for our extended right end and the hinges for our extended left end. We haven't really tested anything at all. So I'm going to jump out of this at this point and take a look and see what we're getting. But before I do that, I need to close this if this.name is equal to hinge then. When you've got an end diff that's way down here and it's hard to tell what it's actually associated with, a lot of times it can be helpful to include what the if was for up above, just to kind of help you find everything you can do to help you track what you did in the past when you're looking at your code at a later date is helpful. It's why we do the indentation. It's why I've sort of like segmented this. You're not going to remember 6 months from now what you did. And so leave yourself these notes. It's really, really helpful. These are even like honestly kind of weak notes. They're not bad. They're kind of weak. This could be done much, much, much better, but it's good enough for what I'm doing here. So at this point, I'm going to kind of jump out and test and make sure that we don't have any errors. Got an error, line 33. It expected then in an if condition then. So shame on me. Not every programming language requires a then. And because I copied this, I'm going to have it down here also. As I've mentioned in the past, when you get those error messages, don't just click them. I'm going to have another error right here. I'm seeing it right now, actually. So I'm not even going to go back to the job yet because I did see I was missing this then. Anyway, when you get the error messages, don't just click OK. Read them, understand them. It will help. So at this point, I'm not getting any errors. I'm getting my full overlay soft close hinge annotation. And I'm not really able to see what my hinges are here. So it's kind of hard for me to know whether or not it's working correctly. Truthfully, I kind of expected a little bit more than that. Let's take a look at this and see. Well, honestly, I think I'm just going to jump to my reports because I think that that will be the easiest way for me to tell. Although I have so many cabinets in here, it's actually going to be maybe a little bit difficult to see, but okay. Really, really slow reports today. Wow. I'm wondering if for some reason my software is crashing. All right, well, I'm just gonna force close this. Try again. All right, my ACC test UCS is on. Oh. No? Let's see here. I know for sure actually this is not working as intended right now for some reason. I kind of need to dig into this and check. Ah, that would be why, right there. What do you know? My exit was the opposite of what it needed to be. There we go. All right, so I'm getting the correct hinge showing up here now, and I'm wondering if my annotation will change later. But what we can see here is that the hinges are switching themselves around correctly. And I'm going to try to go back to the report center here to see if we can actually see that the hinges have changed. My reports today are just not doing well. Let's see if we get a report. All right, so it is working, as you can see. We've got 4 of these 170-degree full overlay soft close hinges. We've got 4 of these 95-degree overlay blind corner soft close hinges. And then we've got 8 regular full overlay soft close hinges. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4 of the regular ones. And then for these other cabinets, right, we've got some other hinges that are reporting. Sorry, that's 4 for this cabinet that are the standard full overlay, 4 for this cabinet that are standard full overlay. There's 2 170s on this end, 2 170s on this one, and then 2 blind on this section here, and 2 blind on this section here. So that checks out. At this point, the hinges are correct, but my hinge plates will not be reporting correctly. To swap the hinge plate out, it's fairly it's fairly similar. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because I really try to keep these videos under an hour and we're over. So I'm going to try to just kind of jump through this next little part. So we're going to start a hinge plate section here. And we're not checking to see if it's hinges any longer. So we don't need to go within this end if. We're actually going to start a new if. So if the name of this is a hinge plate, then what we're going to check to see is what is the hinge's material ID currently. So the reason this works is earlier in the UCS, and the UCS will always read top to bottom. Earlier in the UCS, we've already changed to the hinge. So to simplify this, all I really need to check for is has my hinge been changed to one of the two possible blind corner cabinet hinges? And if it has, then I'm going to set the quantity of my standard hinge plate to 0. So we know up here 2164 and 116 are the two material ID numbers referencing my blind panel hinges. So we can check to see if the material ID of the hinge is 2164 or 116. And if it is, we can set our hinge quantity to 0. So referencing this one is a little bit, I don't want to say tricky, but it's different from what we've done because we need to get specific. And we're actually going, because of the way hinge plates are located in the object tree, we need to climb up the tree and then go down the tree down a different path. So I'm going to comment this out so we don't get an error, and I'm going to just jump into the object tree and try to explain a bit better what I'm talking about. So as we look at this, right, we've got the face of our cabinet. We're looking at a door opening, and specifically at a door. Now, what you will notice is, for a door opening, the door object is actually siblings with the hinge plate. So the hinge plates are not a child of the door object. However, hinges are. And if you drill down into hinge, you'll notice that there is no hinge plate. Because again, the hinge plate is actually a sibling of the door object. So if we are wanting, if we're looking at a hinge plate in our user created standard, right? If this .name is equal to s underscore hinge plate, and we want to check the material ID of the hinge, which is a child of a sibling, you need to go up the object tree one level. You don't necessarily have to, but I find it to be easier, right? Up the object tree one level, then down to an object and reference it, and down again to the next object to reference it. So how do we do that? First of all, this is one of the times that I feel like it's a very good idea to snip something so that we've got a reference to it. But this is not really gonna be easy for me to show at the same time. But essentially, right, I'm starting right here. And to go up a level without specifying what level you wish to go to, you use a colon. We've talked about that before. So I want to go up one level, because I want to go from here to my door open, which is a colon. And then I want to go down a level from the door open to my door. And to go down a level in the object tree, you use a period. So colon period basically says go up a level, then go down a level. But what it allows us to do is specify which level down we want to go to. It allows us to define very clearly the path that we're trying to refer to. So we want to go, again, up, then down a level to the door. We don't want to go down a level to hinge plate or something, so .dor. And then from there, we want to go down a level to see what hinge that door, which is a sibling of the hinge plate, which are both children of the door open, what hinge is this door calling out? So if you look up here, .door, .hinge, .door, .hinge. And what are we looking for? We're trying to see what material this hinge currently is made from. Because again, we're trying to see, has this hinge been changed from whatever it was before, which we don't care about, to a blind panel hinge. So to check a material ID, we use _m:\mat ID. So we're going to check to see, is it 2164 or 116? But I kind of forgot to put the if part, right? So if you're a hinge plate and your parents' doors hinge material ID is equal to 2164, or you do the same thing. Instead of checking for 2164, which would be the soft close, we're going to check for 116, which is the self close, because in either case I use the same hinge plate. Then I actually want to set the quantity to 0. Now, why? Why do I want to set the quantity to 0? I'm going to throw an exit in here before this even runs so that I can kind of explain a bit more with context why I'm doing this. If you'll remember before on my blind corner hinge, I said it was easier for me when I was working with the model or when I was building this to just include the hinge plate right on the model to help me better place my operations. So you can see right here, I have my hinge plate that's supposed to be associated with my blind panel hinge displaying and creating operations. The problem is that I still show this other default hinge plate here. That's my standard hinge plate from my other hinge. And so what I'm trying to do is basically target this hinge and say, hey, target this hinge plate and tell it, hey, if the hinge that you're actually supposed to be associated with is not, the standard hinge that you're looking for, or basically if it's a blind corner hinge, then we need you to go away because you're just cluttering the drawings and you're going to report incorrectly and, whatever. So that's what this next portion is for. right? If the name is hinge plate, then if either of the hinges, if the hinges for the door, rather, is either of our blind corner hinge material IDs for self or soft close, then we want you to disappear and not report. And there it goes. So because this hinge plate's door's hinge is one of the blind panel hinge material IDs, this hinge plate disappeared. But you will notice over here, this hinge plate did not. Because this hinge plate's door's hinge material ID is not the blind panel hinge. It's kind of complicated to talk about, I guess, or convoluted to talk about, but hopefully it makes sense based on what I've been showing so far. So then if we're making this particular hinge go away, that means that we need to add a hinge plate for reports, because the hinge plate that I've got included in my model doesn't report. It's just there. It's just displaying, because all my hinge model is going to report as a hinge. So far as I understand, you can't have like other pieces of hardware inside of a hardware model, which is what this would require if it was going to work. So anyway, at this point, I need to do one more if this dot name is equal to hinge. I might have been able to include it up here. I don't really know. I'm not going to explore. We're already going a bit long, but so I decided to kind of change this a little bit. I've got hinge plate removal section, and now I'm going to have a hinge plate addition section. And I'm actually going to check to see if the name is, if it's a hinge. And so why am I not just basically replacing the material ID of the hinge plate? Again, it has everything to do with the visuals. The visual of that floating hinge plate is confusing, and so I wanted to get rid of it not only from my reports, but also from display. So I set the quantity to 0. What I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to dim a hinge plate that I set to be invisible that's associated with this hinge, so that when we do go to reports, I'm reporting not only my hinge, but also my hinge plate. But because of the way I'm doing it, and because of the fact that I'm going to set it to have a visibility of false, you won't even see it. So it'll get the reports correct, it'll get the visuals looking good, and hopefully everything works out. So what I want to do here next, basically, is say, if you're not a blind panel hinge, get out of here. Quit. Leave the UCS. You're done. There's nothing else for you here. And we're going to do that by checking for these two material IDs that we've got up here, 2164 and 116. So if this material ID does not equal 116 and this material ID does not equal 2164, so if it's neither of the blind panel hinge material IDs that we have defined previously, then exit, because we don't want you to have an extra hinge plate dimmed to you. That doesn't help us to sort of close the loop on this, I guess, if you will, or provide the other part of this and how this works. At this point, every hinge that we should be working on should be either blind panel hinge, which we want to add the hinge plate to, or a 170 degree hinge, which I don't need to change the hinge plate of because it works with my standard hinge plate that I use for for all of my hinges. So, right, if you're not a blind panel hinge material, or if you are, in this case, 170-degree hinge material, exit. We don't need you to do anything else in here. Now that all the wrong hinges are gone, all of the incorrect hinges are out of here, now we just want to dim a hinge plate as a new part. It doesn't really matter what you have, like the dx, dy, dz, and all that stuff too. But I'm nearly positive that if any of your dx, dy, or dz values are at 0, I think that that kind of interferes with its ability to report. So the hinge plate dx, dy, and dz values, I normally, when I'm doing something like this, will set them to be 1. And I need to set this to be the material ID of my special hinge plate. And I did not actually list that in my document, but I do have it in my notes. The hinge plate material ID that we use to change the offset of the blind panel hinge that we use is 1130. Ooh. And the last thing I'm going to use is the visible attribute, or whatever we want to call this, the visible parameter. And I'm going to set this to be 0. I do not want for this to be visible. I want for this to be hidden from sight, hidden from every single view except for the reports. And there's one last thing that you would do on this if you were going to, well, depending on how you price, if you even use the software for pricing, everything that we draw, well, everything that we sell, we draw. That's just our business model. I know that you might not agree with that. That's okay. But it's the way that we work. And so every single thing that I build into the software has to have a price. And, you know, because of reasons, all of our pricing is handled through a UCS. It's basically references our materials and their material costs and does some things with them. Right, wrong, or other, that's how it is. And so for my particular case in here, I would need to also assign a price value to this. And I know that there's like the CRNCY or whatever for pricing, but I don't know why I never picked that up and used it, but for whatever reason I just used the decimal for prices. I think that it works for me just fine, so that's what I do. And then whatever your formula is for your pricing. And my pricing UCS defines these values, and so I don't really need to know what they are. I just know that this is a piece of hardware, and I've got a formula somewhere in my pricing UCS that defines ACC hardware multiplier. So I'm going to take the cost of our material, and since I know it's hardware, I'm going to multiply it by this value that I have from another UCS, which should then price this hinge plate for me and drive it to our bid center. So this should be it. So to kind of button this up, and I am a little bit strange about my formatting, so bear with me. I don't really know why I need to do this, but I do. Because if it's all out of whack, I kind of get cranky. So, all right. this should be it. So we've swapped the hinges depending on the conditions. We don't really care if it's a pair of doors or not. We've eliminated the hinge plate that we don't want because of the way that we built the material model. And we have added the correct hinge plate that we do want for reporting purposes. What do you know? I have another error. So line 88, something is wrong. HNT. There you go. So typos. I don't remember where this joke originally came from, but there's a... Oh my gosh, what's going on here? Helps if you have equals there. There's a... I'm not even going to say it right, so I won't really repeat it, but there's a programming joke that, you know, there are only... I think it's like there's only 3 types of different problems you run into when programming, and they are typos and off by 1 errors. Just sit with that one. Anyway, so we don't get any more errors, and at this point everything seems to be looking correct. My annotations are kind of funky for some reason. I think it's probably because I turned one of my UCSs off or something. I don't know. It's not switching my annotations right now, but that's not the point of this video. But I do want to delete my cabinets that will not have had their hinges changed. Make sure I only have 1 room. Just rebuild my job real quick and then check my reports. So what I should have is I should have 4 170-degree hinges. I should have 4 standard hinge plates. I should have 4 blind panel hinges and 4 blind panel hinge plates, if we've done this correctly. I'm not sure why my reports are chugging so hard today. Sorry for the delays on this. So there you have it. I've got my 4 0mm hinge plates, which are my standard hinge plates for our full overlay and half overlay hinges and 170-degree hinges. And then I've got 4 3mm offset hinge plates, which are the hinge plates that we use for our blind corner hinges. Got 4 170-degree hinges and 4 blind corner cabinet hinges. So the cool thing about this really is that you don't have to click on your doors and do anything. The hinges and the hinge plates themselves determined based on the fact that you extended the end of your cabinet that they needed to change. And you didn't have to come in here because, you know, what really encouraged me to even start down this path and build this was the fact that how do you change just the left hinges on a pair of doors? If you change your hinges, it's for everything because a pair of doors is treated like one sort of entity, if you will. And so if you wanted to, through the section editor and the default tools from Cabinavision, do this, you'd have to split your doors and then, you know, I think best practice, equalize the width on them so that they still function as a pair of doors. And then you have to change this door's hinges to be the blind panel and this door's hinges to be the 170 degrees. And that's not hard to do. I'm aware of that. I know it's not hard to do, but we are trying to find different ways to speed ourselves up just a little bit more as we're processing our work while eliminating the possibility of errors and making sure that we get our hardware reports and our drawings and everything set up exactly correct. This is one of those things that helps you get more done. it doesn't really let you like turn your brain off, as I hear some people kind of talk about. We're not doing this to allow people to stop thinking. We are doing this to free their minds up and allow them to stop worrying about these stupid little things that we can automate and build solutions for, and instead free the human mind to work on the things that only human minds can work on, which is coming up with better ways to do what we do, finding safer ways to do what we do, or whatever types of things that a program will not in our lives most likely be able to do. It's to free our minds up to do that. So hope you guys have enjoyed. If you have any questions about it, let me know. Otherwise, I will be posting this up on YouTube with a link that contains the document that I referenced for this. And have a nice Friday.